Hello, my name is Davis Balson, and today I'll be presenting on Blood Quantum, a 2019 Indigenous futurism zombie horror film directed by Jeff Barnaby, who's Mi'kmaq. This film uses the zombie genre to explore colonialism, identity, and Indigenous survivance in a really bold and innovative way. For those of you who might not know, Indigenous futurism is a movement that uses sci-fi and genre tropes to imagine Indigenous people in the future, something mainstream media has historically failed to do. So the film is set on the Red Crow Reserve in 1981 in Canada. It doesn't start with a big explosion. It starts with an unsettling omen. An elder named Jizuku is gutting salmon, only to watch the fish continue to jump and swim after being cleaned. It's a visceral warning that the natural order has been disrupted. As the zombie outbreak begins, we follow Trailer, a local sheriff who witnesses the dead coming back to life, even his own dog. But there's a central hook. The Mi'kmaq people are completely immune to the zombie infection. While they can still be torn apart and killed, they cannot be turned. This creates an immediate high stakes tension. Settlers who are not immune flee to the reserve for protection. The community is forced to decide, do we let in the people who represent this very system that oppressed us, or do we protect our own borders at all costs? So, about Jeff Barnaby. Jeff Barnaby was a visionary Mi'kmaq filmmaker known for gritty political charged cinema, and his work is often confronts colonial violence and sovereignty head on. Barnaby famously said that horror was a perfect genre for indigenous stories because indigenous people have been living in a post apocalyptic world since 1492. He used visceral nature of horror to make indigenous issues feel urgent and impossible to ignore. Sadly, Barnaby passed away in 2022, but Blood Quantum remains his most powerful legacy, a perfect blend of cruel critique and intense visual storytelling. The history behind Blood Quantum. To understand the film, you have to understand the title. The term blood quantum comes from a real colonial policy used by the US and Canadian governments to measure indigenous identity through blood percentage. Historically, it was a tool of statistical extermination used to restrict tribal citizenship and land access. Barnaby flips this concept completely. In the film, indigenous blood becomes a biological advantage, a literal immunity. This reversal is the film's core metaphor. A colonial tool meant to limit and erase indigenous identity becomes the very thing that ensures their survival. It turns a historical liability into the world's most valuable asset. So the main characters and the human stakes in the movie are Trailer, Lysol, and Joseph. To understand the flow of the movie, we have to look at the characters. We have Trailer, the sheriff trying to keep the peace, and his two sons, Joseph and Lysol, who represent two different ways of reacting to trauma. Joseph is expecting a child with his white girlfriend Charlie, representing hope and a blended future. Lysol, however, is fueled by a deep seated rage against the settlers. He views the refugees as a plague even before they turn into zombies. This internal conflict is the heart of the movie. How do you maintain your humanity and stay open to the world that has been historically hostile to you? The tension between brothers eventually leads to the camp's tragic downfall, showing that the threat isn't just outside the gates, it's the trauma within. The visual and technical style of the film. The film's visual style is harsh grounded. The Red Crow Reserve is shown with industrial textures a sense of lived-in struggle. Barnaby uses beautiful hand-drawn animation sequences to represent trauma and ancient prophecy, giving the film a layered mythic quality. The practical gore effects are extremely visceral. They aren't just for shock value, they mirror the real physical violence indigenous communities have endured through history. The color palette relies on cold blues and deep blood reds, symbolizing the constant tension between the freezing isolation of the reserve and the violent threat of the Zeds, the film's term for the zombies. So, why did he use horror and why did he use zombies? Barnaby chose horror because it allows colonial violence to be shown directly rather than metaphorically. In this film, zombies represent settlers. They are relentless, boundary breaking, and driven by insatiable hunger for land and resources. This flips the typical Hollywood narrative where indigenous people are portrayed as the victims or noble savages. Here, they are the ones with power, the strategy, and the literal biological immunity. The zombies are consumerist force, and the Mi'kmaq are the only ones standing in the way of total erasure. Survivance in action. One of the strongest connections to our AIS 102 course concepts is the term of survivance, a term coined by General Vizenor, which means an active presence in the rejection of victimhood. The Red Crow community embodies survivance through the refusal to disappear. They use traditional knowledge, like Jisaku and the katana style sword, made from ancient techniques, alongside modern tactics and technology. Their immunity is a symbol of cultural endurance, despite centuries of colonial attempts to erase them. The Mi'kmaq people survive, adapt, and protect their future. They aren't just surviving the apocalypse, they're defying it. So, the end and the future for the movie. The film's ending is heavy but symbolic. After the camp is overrun, the story concludes with the birth of Joseph and Charlie's baby. Even though the world has ended and many of our heroes have fallen, the baby is healthy and uninfected. This is the ultimate image of the indigenous futurism, the next generation carrying on the bloodline into the new unknown world. They suggest that while the structures of colonialism, the zombies, might destroy everything, the indigenous spirit and the bloodline will remain when the dust settles. So, for me, this film reshaped how I see the indigenous resistance. As a finance major, I often think about systems and policies, and seeing the blood quantum turn my restrictive policy into a source of strength and a powerful aha moment. Blood Quantum made the themes for IAS 102 feel immediate and alive. It shows the indigenous people not as victims of history, but as powerful agents in their own future. Barnaby's work challenges us to rethink how indigenous stories are told and who gets to survive in the narratives we consume. Thank you for listening.